When Protestants are considering the possibility of becoming Roman Catholic, there are usually a couple of beliefs that cause the most difficulty. The papacy, the Eucharist becoming the flesh and blood of Jesus, corruption in church history, and Mary. In this episode, we're going to focus on Mary, and we have someone who is going to help us with this. And that is Mary herself. Welcome to episode 45 of All Roads Lead to Rome, the podcast for anyone who wants to know more about the richness of Catholicism. If you are a Catholic that needs remedial classes, or if you are a Protestant or non-religious person who has a head full of bad information like I did, this is the podcast for you. If you want to become a true roadie here, visit our website, allroadsleadtorome.net, to get the full roadmap. You can sign up for our free weekly newsletter, connect with us on social media, reach out to me, and even become one of the patrons who make all of this magic happen. You know you keep thinking about checking out the website. Do it now, please and thank you. I'm Dr. Bickford, and in this episode we're going to talk about Apparitions of the Virgin Mary. Now, Protestants struggle with why Catholics hold Mary in such high regard. We dealt with that very issue in episode 4 of this podcast. I hit it that early on because Marian dogma is such a big deal. In episode 20, which was on pilgrimages, I talked about a few of the apparition sites. In episode 25, which was on miracles, I mentioned Marian apparitions as one of the examples of miracles. So, if you want the background, I suggest you check out those episodes. Today, we're going to dig deeper into the subject. So let's start with a definition. A Marian apparition is a supernatural vision or manifestation of the Virgin Mary to individuals or groups, and she always shares a message calling for prayer or conversion or hope. These visions often occur in times of crisis. When someone reports an apparition, the Church does not automatically endorse them. They go through a rigorous review process that can take years or decades. And there have been times when the Church has either refused to endorse something as authentic or has reserved judgment and just let it ride. So, let's start with the big question. Why do they happen? They prove that Mary plays a bigger role in the life of the Church than just having given birth to Jesus. She continues to show her maternal care for the world and always works to lead people back to her Son. Her presence shows God is not distant from the world, but actually involved in history, and she is a part of that. She's a mother helping her children return to Christ, and she does it through a call of prayer or repentance or evangelism or sometimes even something else. The three most famous apparitions were at Guadalupe, Mexico in 1531, Lourdes in France in 1858, and Fatima in Portugal in 1917. Famous apparitions that are currently being studied were at Medjugorje in Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1981, Kibeho, Rwanda, and those occurred from 1981 to 1989, and Akita, Japan in 1973. There are other apparitions, some that have a historical significance but have never received formal approval. Those include the apparition at Zaragoza in Spain in the year 40, Walshingham, England in 1061, and Pompeii, Italy in the 1870s. So the Church does not rush into approval. The process starts with a local diocese, where the bishop starts the investigative process to see if the event is, quote, worthy of belief. Experts, including theologians and psychologists, examine the event and also the state of the witnesses. And it's all done with the assumption that no true apparition can contradict any church doctrine because God does not behave inconsistently. And the deposit of faith, that the set of church dogma, was settled in the apostolic age. It does not change. Instead, apparitions, they don't change the faith, they reinforce the faith. And eventually, if there is enough evidence for a particular apparition, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith at the Vatican will review and then decide if the apparition should be approved. This process, as I just described, can take decades or even longer. Can you imagine how thick and detailed those report files must get? It's amazing. So, if you want a clear understanding of why they happen, you have to look at each one individually. So let's look at a bunch of them today and see what we learn. I want to start with the most famous and perhaps the most impactful one in history, and that is the apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Seriously, this is one of the most important events since the biblical period that has ever taken place in Christian history. If you come from a Protestant background, you may never even have heard of it, which is wild if you really think about it. So in December 1531, just 10 years after the fall of the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, sorry if I mispronounced, that's going to happen this entire episode. After the fall of the Aztec capital, the indigenous people were devastated. They were crushed politically, culturally, and spiritually. Spanish missionaries tried to spread the Christian faith, but as you can imagine, they were met with great suspicion. Well, on December 9th, Juan Diego, a native who converted to Christianity, but a man who was poor and uneducated, he was walking to Mass when he heard beautiful music and saw a radiant woman standing before him. She spoke to him in his native language and called him her little son. She would go on to appear to him 4 times. She asked for a church to be built so that more people could know her. And in talking with his bishop about it, the bishop, Juan de Samaraje, requested a sign from her to see that this was all real. And so in one of the visitations, Mary gave Juan a bunch of Castilian roses that grew in Castile, Spain, which do not grow in Mexico. He wrapped them in his cloak, something they called a tilma. When he gave them to the bishop and opened the cloak, he discovered that her image was on the inside of the tilma. Now, a tilma is made of rough cactus fiber, and though they're cheap and easy to make, they don't last very long. They actually decompose after a few years or a decade or so. However, this tilma with the image of Mary still exists, and it's now over 500 years old, and it has shown no sign of deterioration. The image of Mary on it is smooth as if it's a photograph and not painted. In fact, there are no brush marks on it. And in Mary's eyes, you can see the reflection of Juan Diego. And there are stars on the image around her, and they coincide with how the sky looked on that night of December 12th, 1531. Science cannot explain any of this. Her words to Juan Diego were, quote, "Am I not here? I, who am your mother? Are you not under my shadow and protection?" End quote. This maternal tenderness is at the center of Guadalupe's message. She comes to those who feel unseen, unheard, and unloved. And she shared this message with someone who fit all those categories. But even more important than her appearance to Juan was the effect that this incident caused. Within a decade, 8 to 10 million people converted. And not only that, but the Aztec practice of human sacrifice came to a very quick end. 8 to 10 million converts. The effect of it continues today because the shrine built at the site is the most visited Catholic shrine in the world. Today, it receives anywhere from 10 to 20 million visitors a year. And Juan Diego's tilma is still in the shrine. How do you even begin to process this? In 1945, Pope Pius XII declared her, quote, Queen of Mexico and Empress of the Americas, unquote. St. John Paul II later named her the patron of the Americas and star of the new evangelization. Many people who study theology and history will look at those years and in the 1530s, and they'll look at the work of Martin Luther and John Calvin and the other Protestant leaders who were breaking away from the church in Europe, and yet will pay no attention to the up to 10 million people who converted so quickly in Mexico and changed the destiny of both North and South America. The scale of this event and the effect that it has today is hard to fully comprehend. It's that big. You can't just dismiss that. Now, if you're curious, there's a lot more detail to this apparition than I've shared here. But what it should show you is that Mary has a role in salvation history that goes beyond just being a random person that gave birth to Jesus. That's Our Lady of Guadalupe. Now let's turn our attention to Our Lady of Lourdes. Lourdes is a town located in the Pyrenees Mountains on the border between France and Spain. And the apparitions there occurred in 1858, which was a very troubling time in France. The scars of the French Revolution a generation before were still visible, especially in the church where there was so much anti-Catholic persecution. Industrialization had brought more poverty and disease to the poor. And the rise of secularism left many Catholics feeling marginalized and ridiculed for their faith. In 1854, just 4 years earlier, the church had promulgated the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, meaning that the Virgin Mary was conceived without original sin. Well, in a surprising and fascinating way, Lourdes became the confirmation of this doctrine, and it confirmed it in a miraculous way. And the story focuses on Bernadette Soubirous, who was 14 years old in 1858 when it happened. She was from a poor family, and she had always been a sickly child. She had no education and spoke Occitan, or Occitan, the local language spoken in a very narrow area in the mountains there. She actually did not understand French, even though she was technically in France. At her church, the catechism was taught in French, and she couldn't understand it. In fact, she had not even made her first communion yet. And her family lived in a single room of what had once been a jail cell. Her father had been a miller, but the mill failed, and he had become a day laborer. And her mother did odd jobs like laundry. Bernadette was one of 9 children, but 3 of the 9 had died very young. So this is a family that knew how to struggle and experienced it. Well, on February 11th, 1858, Bernadette, her sister, and a friend were gathering firewood by a grotto, which is a rocky outcrop by a river. She heard a strong wind, but nothing moved. She looked toward the grotto and saw a young woman dressed in white with a blue sash and a gold rose on each foot. The woman made the sign of the cross with a rosary in her hand and invited Bernadette to pray with her. Now, between February 11th and July 16th, Bernadette experienced 18 apparitions. Each one had its own significance. In the early ones, the lady said little but prayed the rosary with Bernadette. She then began calling for penance from the people of the world. On February 25th, she instructed Bernadette to drink at the spring and wash herself. But there was no spring. It was just muddy water. So Bernadette had to dig into the mud. And as she started to dig, water started to flow. And this flow became a spring that still flows today. And this spring has become the source of countless miraculous healings. But more on that in a bit. On March 25th, the lady revealed herself by saying in Occitan, quote, "I am the Immaculate Conception," end quote. So at Guadalupe, she spoke to Juan Diego in his native Aztec language, and she spoke to Bernadette at Lourdes in hers. However, Bernadette, being uneducated, did not understand what the phrase meant. And she repeated it over and over to herself. She ran to her priest so she would not forget it when she said it to him because it meant nothing to her. And when she told the parish priest, he was stunned. A poor, uneducated girl could not have invented such a theological term, and there was no way that she was familiar with the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, which was just 4 years old at that point. This moment became a decisive confirmation of the apparition's authenticity. On July 16th, the feast day of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, Bernadette saw the Lady one last time, and it was a silent farewell filled with peace. Bernadette would later describe Mary as a young girl of about 14 or 15 years old, and that she was the same height as Bernadette. Now, Bernadette, because of malnutrition, was only 4 foot 7 inches, or about 1.4 meters. It sounds wonderful, but at the time it was very controversial. At one point, her parents thought she was acting crazy because of the spiritual ecstasies she was experiencing, and they ordered her not to go back to the grotto, but she did. Among the early miracles occurring, there were also some hoaxes. So the government closed off the grotto and put a fence around it to stop people from going to it at all. It caused a huge controversy, and it ended up reopening directly by the orders of Emperor Napoleon III. And the church, it tried to avoid dealing with this for a number of years. But it had to. Bernadette became a nun of the Order of the Sisters of Charity of Nevers. She spent the rest of her life working as an assistant in the infirmary and creating ornate embroidery for altar cloths and vestments. One time, many, many years later, when she was asked about the visions, she replied, quote, "The Virgin used me as a broom to remove the dust. When the work is done, the broom is put behind the door again." End quote. She was not unhappy that the visions had ended. She accepted that she had done her job and was content to spend the rest of her days in a convent. Well, Bernadette later contracted tuberculosis and died a very painful death at age 35. Her last words were, quote, "Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for me," end quote. She was canonized in 1933 by Pope Pius XI and is now a saint. Lourdes has become a major pilgrimage site, hosting anywhere from 4 to 6 million visitors a year. Since 1858, more than 7,000 healings have been documented at Lourdes. The church has officially recognized 70 of them as miraculous after going through rigorous medical and theological investigation. All 70 of those miracles were all instantaneous, complete, lasting, and have no medical explanation. And many of the other 7,000 are currently under review. But I know there are more than that. I know someone who had a miraculous healing of terminal cancer at Lourdes, but he never reported it because he was too overwhelmed by the experience. I've shared before, I'm a Knight of the Order of Malta, and every year my association fills an airplane with sick people making pilgrimage to Lourdes and seeking a miracle. Each patient is paired with a knight or dame of the order. I haven't done this pilgrimage yet, but I hope to do so soon. Lourdes is the center of the highest number of miraculous healings in the world. Think about that. There are other apparitions that are fully recognized by the church, including La Salette, France in 1846, Pont-Main, France, 1871, Knock, Ireland, 1879, Fatima, Portugal, 1917, Bereng in Belgium, 1932 to 1933, and Banneux, Belgium, in 1933. Let's now look at a few that have been approved by local bishops, but not yet by the Universal Church. The first is Our Lady of Good Help, which happened in Champion, Wisconsin, in the United States in 1859. This is a truly remarkable yet poorly known story of American Catholic history. In the mid-19th century, northern Wisconsin was rugged farmland. The area had been settled by Belgian immigrants. There were very few churches, very few priests, and catechesis, religious education, was sporadic at best. In 1855, Adele Brizet and her family, fresh from Belgium, settled in the area. She had lost one eye in a childhood accident, but she also had a deep faith and a desire to serve God. On October 9th, 1859, she was walking along a trail when she saw a woman standing between two trees. This woman was clothed in dazzling white, with a yellow sash at her waist and a crown of stars on her head. Adele panicked and ran away. A week later, as she walked to Sunday Mass with her sister and a friend, the same woman appeared in the same place, but only Adele saw her. After Mass, Adele returned to the spot, and the woman appeared a third time. And Adele asked, quote, "In God's name, who are you and what do you want of me?" End quote. The lady replied, quote, "I am the Queen of Heaven who prays for the conversion of sinners," end quote. She then gave Adele a mission, quote, "Gather the children in this wild country and teach them what they should know for salvation," end quote. Adele protested that she was uneducated and unworthy, but Mary reassured her with these words, quote, "Teach them their catechism, how to sign for themselves with the sign of the cross, and how to approach the sacraments," end quote. This simple instruction became the heart of Adele's life. Adele immediately began fulfilling Mary's request. She traveled from cabin to cabin, walking miles through forest and snow to teach children their prayers and catechism. Many families were poor and could not pay her, but she accepted food or shelter when offered and trusted God for the rest. Eventually, with the help of local families, Adele established a small school and a community of women dedicated to teaching and prayer. They built a site on they built a chapel on the site of the apparition and named it Our Lady of Good Help, a title reflecting Mary's maternal assistance. Adele's work was not glamorous. It involved teaching children to read, preparing them for First Communion, caring for the sick, comforting the dying, and supporting struggling families. But her mission embodied the heart of Catholic evangelization: patient, personal, and rooted in love. The most dramatic event associated with Our Lady of Good Help occurred on October 8th, 1871, the night of the Peshtigo fire, one of the deadliest wildfires in American history. A massive firestorm swept across northeastern Wisconsin, destroying entire towns and killing thousands of people. As flames approached the chapel and the school, Adele gathered the children and the local families, and they processed around the grounds, carrying a statue of Mary and praying the rosary. The fire raged around them, but the flames stopped at the edge of the chapel's property. Everything outside the shrine was reduced to ash. Everything inside was left untouched. The next morning, the people returned to what was left of their homes, convinced that Mary had protected them. And this event became a powerful sign of the shrine's spiritual significance. The message of Our Lady of Good Hope is simple, yet profound, rooted in the heart of the gospel. It's a call to catechesis, to education, a reminder of the dignity of being humble, and it had a focus on the call for the conversion of sinners. Today, the shrine is known as the National Shrine of Our Lady of Champion. It draws lots of pilgrims. In 2010, Bishop David Ricken of Green Bay formally approved the apparition as worthy of belief, making it the first and only approved Marian apparition site in the United States. Now, this does not yet have the approval of the Universal Church, but the evaluation is ongoing. But the message remains as relevant now as it did in 1859. Quote, "Teach the children what they should know for salvation," end quote. Other similar apparitions include Our Lady of Laus from Laus, France, 1664 to 1718, Our Lady of Siluva from Siluva, Lithuania, 1608, Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal from Paris in 1830, and Our Lady of Gietzerwald in Poland in 1877. Now, let's turn our attention to historically significant apparitions that have a strong tradition associated with them, but never had any formal action taken by the church. Perhaps the best known is Our Lady of Walshingham in England, which occurred in the year 1061. Walshingham is known as England's Nazareth. It's one of the oldest pilgrimage sites in all of Europe. In 1061, Richeldes of Faverges, a devoutly pious noblewoman, had experienced a series of visions of the Blessed Virgin Mary. According to tradition, Mary transported her to Nazareth to show her the house where the Annunciation took place. Mary then asked Richeldes to build a replica of that holy house in Walshingham. And so she built the house, and it became a very special place. By the 12th century, it rivaled Rome, Jerusalem, and Santiago de Compostela as pilgrimage sites. Kings, queens, peasants, and monks all traveled the Walshingham Way to pray in the Holy House. And it's known for miracles, conversions, and answered prayers. The shrine's reputation spread across Europe, and England became known as Our Lady's Dowry, a title expressing the nation's special devotion to Mary. King Henry III walked barefoot to the shrine. King Edward I made multiple pilgrimages. And before his break with Rome, Henry VIII was also a frequent pilgrim. However, in 1538, under orders from Henry VIII, the shrine was destroyed as part of the dissolution of all the monasteries in England. Monasteries all over the country were broken up and sold off to wealthy friends and patrons of Henry VIII. The statue of Our Lady of Walshingham was taken to London and publicly burned. The house was torn down, and pilgrimages to the site were outlawed. For the next 350 years, there was silence. A revival began in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In 1897, Alfred Hope Patton commissioned a new statue and built a replica of the Holy House. In the same year, Pope Leo XIII approved the restoration of the shrine, and it's become a major center of devotion today. And as I said earlier, other historically significant sites include Our Lady of the Pillar in Zaragoza, Spain from the year 40, as well as Our Lady of Pompeii, Italy from the 1870s. There are other sites that currently enjoy widespread devotion, but are still under investigation by the Church. The most famous of these is Our Lady of Medjugorje in Bosnia-Herzegovina. This apparition began in 1981 and is still ongoing. In 1981, Medjugorje was a rural village in what was then Yugoslavia. Though it was a communist country, the people were devoutly Catholic. And it was in this fragile environment that 6 young people, and forgive me for my pronunciations, Vika Ivankovic, Mirjana Dragovic, Ivanka Ivankovic, Marija Pavlovic, and Jakov Kolo. And the sixth one is Ivan Dragovicic. They reported seeing a radiant woman on a hillside near the village on June 24th, 1981. The next day, the encounter continued, and the figure identified herself as the Blessed Virgin Mary. The children described Mary as a young woman of extraordinary beauty, clothed in light, with a maternal presence that filled them with peace. She spoke to them with tenderness, urging them to pray, to trust God, and to seek reconciliation. Her first reported message was, quote, "Peace, peace, peace, and only peace," end quote. Given the wars that would soon engulf the Balkans, this message took on prophetic weight. Medjugorje became a place where people prayed for peace, not only in the world, but in their own hearts. And over time, 5 central themes emerged, often called the 5 stones of Medjugorje, echoing David's stones against Goliath. And they are 1, prayer, especially the rosary. 2, fasting, traditionally on bread and water. 3, daily reading of Scripture. 4, confession, at least monthly, and 5, the Eucharist, the center of Christian life. These practices are not new. They're in the heart of Catholic spirituality. Medjugorje's power lies in the way Mary calls the faithful back to these essentials, and did so with urgency and love. Now, of all the pilgrimage sites and apparition sites, Medjugorje is often called the confessional of the world. Long lines form outside the confessionals, where priests hear confessions in dozens of languages. Many pilgrims speak of returning to the sacrament after years or decades away. Numerous priests, religious, and lay missionaries trace their vocations to their own personal experiences and conversions at Medjugorje. The atmosphere of prayer, silence, and Eucharistic devotion fosters openness to God's call for them. Now, the Catholic Church approaches Medjugorje with careful discernment. The Vatican has not issued a final judgment on the supernatural authenticity of the apparitions, especially because they're still ongoing. And it was just in 2019 that they authorized official pilgrimages to Medjugorje, recognizing there are spiritual fruits and pastoral needs met for millions of pilgrims by going there. The 6 visionaries reported visions, sometimes daily, for years on end. A few report that they continue to this day. What brings scrutiny to them is that none of them ever pursued religious life. Most are married and have secular employment. But the key theme of the apparitions is Mary's emphasis on peace and how it speaks to a world marked by conflict, anxiety, and division. So Our Lady of Medjugorje remains one of the most spiritually influential phenomenon of the modern church, whether or not the apparitions are ultimately given full approval. Another apparition under investigation is Our Lady of Akita in Japan. This happened on a remote convent in northern Japan between 1973 and 1981 at a convent called the Institute for the Handmaids of the Holy Eucharist. The visionary was Sister Agnes Katsuko Sasagawa. She was a convert to Catholicism who suffered from severe hearing loss. Well, on June 12, 1973, she noticed a mysterious light emanating from the tabernacle. The tabernacle is the repository for the consecrated elements of the Eucharist. Shortly after that, she developed a cross-shaped wound on her left hand that was quite painful and bled profusely. The same wound appeared on the same hand of a statue in the convent's chapel, and it also bled human blood. Less than a month later, on July 6th, this near-deaf nun heard a voice coming from the statue, and she understood the words clearly. The messages she received were short but powerful. Mary's first message emphasized the need for prayer, especially the rosary, and acts of reparation for sins committed against God. She warned that humanity had become deeply ungrateful, and that the wounds inflicted upon the heart of Christ were increasing. Mary said to her, quote, "Pray very much the prayers of the rosary. I alone am able still to save you from the calamities which approach," end quote. This maternal plea reflects Mary's role as an intercessor and a protector, urging her children to return to Christ. On October 13th, the anniversary of the miracle of the sun at Fatima, Mary warned that if humanity did not repent, a great chastisement would fall upon the world, one as great as the flood, involving fire falling from the sky. She spoke of divisions within the church, persecution of the faithful, and suffering on a global scale. Yet even with this warning, Mary emphasized hope. Prayer, sacrifice, and trust in God could mitigate or avert that chastisement. And history shows that the prayers did. Even more astounding, between 1975 and 1981, the wooden statue reportedly cried a total of 101 times. And some of these tears were collected and studied and analyzed, and they were found to be real human tears. Witnesses to all of this included the sisters of the convent, local Catholics, medical professionals, journalists, even non-Christian observers. Exactly 1 year after the final message, On October 13th, 1974, Sister Agnes was completely healed of the hearing loss. Her doctor, a non-Christian, attested to the miracle. In 1984, Bishop John Shojiro Ito declared the events of Akita to be of supernatural origin and authorized the veneration of Our Lady of Akita within his diocese. He later stated that the messages were consistent with the teachings of the Church and aligned with the warnings of Fatima. The Church continues to investigate these events. The message of Our Lady of Akita, though, is one of hope, not despair. It's a call for a return to God through prayer, penance, and trust in His mercy. I'll share with you one more of the apparitions under investigation, and it is Our Lady of Zeitoun in Egypt. This one was witnessed by hundreds of thousands of people, including Christians, Muslims, Jews, and atheists. The first apparition happened on April 2nd, 1968, in Zeitoun. It's a working-class neighborhood in Cairo. The Coptic Orthodox Church of St. Mary had been built in the 1920s on a site that had long been associated with the Holy Family's flight into Egypt after the birth of Christ. Two Muslim mechanics were working at a garage across the street from the church when they noticed a luminous figure standing on the church's dome. They assumed it was a woman that was about to commit suicide by jumping off, and so they shouted to her, but then realized that she glowed with a soft white light. And she wasn't standing on top of the building, she was floating above it. Soon a crowd gathered, and people started saying that this was Mary. These apparitions continued for the next 3 years, and they would draw crowds sometimes that reached 250,000 people. Also, some of the visions would last for hours. What made these apparitions different from the other ones is that they were silent. No messages, no warnings, no secrets. Mary herself was the message. And there are actual photographs of this. And I'm showing one now in the video version of the episode. Witnesses to these apparitions reported such things as glowing doves flying at night, luminous clouds, rays of light, the scent of incense, and miraculous healings. The Coptic Orthodox Church under Cyril VI investigated these events carefully. After interviewing witnesses and examining the evidence, the church officially approved the apparitions as being authentic. And remarkably, the Egyptian government also acknowledged the events. President Nasser himself visited the site and witnessed the apparition. The state-run newspaper Al Haram published front-page stories of the sightings as they were taking place. Zeitoun became a place where religious, political, and social divisions dissolved, if only for a moment, but under the light of a silent mother. There are other apparitions currently under investigation, including Our Lady of Kibeho in Rwanda, which took place from 1981 to 1989. And then finally, there are apparitions from the early church. They include Our Lady of Mount Carmel in England in 1251, and it is from this apparition that the brown scapular was introduced. Our Lady of the Snow happened in Rome in the 4th century, and it marked the site on which St. Mary Major, one of the 4 papal basilicas in Rome, would then be built. There are more. And again, I could spend entire episodes on each of these apparitions. There's so much detail beyond what I'm sharing with you. So, what do we do with all this? First, even though the church investigates apparitions and approves some of them, believing this is not a required part of the faith. These apparitions are not part of the official dogma. So, if you struggle with this, it does not impact whether or not you can become a Catholic. That's important for you to know. But I'll be honest and say that as a former Protestant clergyman, I came from a position of assuming that Mary did not play a major role in the faith other than giving birth to Jesus. So intellectually, it was very easy for me to be dismissive of the apparitions. They were hoaxes or pious hallucinations or superstitions and so on. You know, all of the same things that non-believers accuse the disciples of on Easter morning. Yeah, let that sink in. If your mind is closed to the possibility of God working in this way, then you just cannot accept the possibility of God working in this way. But what if God is working in this way? When you dig into the major apparitions, learn about the witnesses and what happens to them. And even see photographs from the more modern ones. When you dig into all that, you get to the point you're going to have to accept that there is something there. Thousands, tens of thousands, and even hundreds of thousands of eyewitnesses cannot be easily dismissed. But I'll warn you, once you reach the point where you think that something might have happened, you have to ask yourself, well then, why did it happen? The answer to that comes from a deeper study of the apparitions, deeper than we can go into here. What you learn is that Mary is our spiritual mother and that she cares for us. Anytime she has ever appeared or spoken, it was always to call us back to her Son. In fact, the last recorded words of Mary in the Gospels was at the wedding of Cana in chapter 2 of John's Gospel, where she says to the attendants, quote, "Do what he tells you," end quote. He being Jesus. Her role has never changed. Those words have been repeated countless times. Do what he tells you. And so, as you study these apparitions, you realize that they are appeals to help to have the world avoid certain calamities or to draw people back to the church or into the church. And then you realize that Mary truly is everything the Catholic Church says about her. And you cannot do anything else then but devote yourself to her. Where are you in this journey? It's taken me several years to get through it. But I'm now a faithful Catholic who prays the rosary every day. I'm planning a pilgrimage to Lourdes and would love to visit the other sites. But I get that it is a hard doctrine for Protestants to grapple with. And as I said before, most Protestants hope that when they die, they'll go to heaven, and the first thing Jesus will say to them is, "Well done, good and faithful servant," quoting Jesus. But I wonder if instead what they will hear first is, "Dude, what do you have against my mom?" If you're stuck at step 1 and are dismissive, then you're not willing to look at the evidence. Be intellectually honest enough to look at it and follow where it leads. Maybe go back and listen to episodes 4, 20, and 25, which lay out the groundwork for this, and then take the examples cited in this episode and look into them yourself. I dare you to. When I did this, I was mortified to see how much of the Christian faith that has existed for 2,000 years that wasn't even stuff I was aware of. But I got there. Thank God that all roads lead to Rome.